Tricker. My kids often go out to trick-or-treat these days, and I have no choice but to remain awake for a long time and giving other kids candy for when they come to my door. I was still sitting there and trying my best not to sleep when I heard a knock from the door. I walked over and opened it, and I couldn't help snorting. "Trick or treat," the person said, making their voice sound high like a child's. They were covered with sheets to look like a ghost. I say like a child because the person standing there was clearly not a child. They were a man, as old, if not a little bit more so, than me. I asked if he'd like some trick-or-treats, and he said yes. I told him that we have an age restriction for this house, unfortunately. I was making a joke, but he didn't laugh. He continued, just staring at me. He said then should he be allowed to get some. By then, the joke was really getting tired. So I said, "Listen man, thanks for the laugh, but these are for the kids, yes?" The man didn't respond. "If are the kids in the house now?" And I said no. And then he asked me, "Who is in the house?" His voice was slowly getting deeper, and I suddenly realized there was a chance this was merely a trick. I told him that it's just my brothers upstairs with my wife. He didn't respond and just stood there. I called to him and he didn't answer. Finally, I decided this was getting creepy, and so I said okay then, and I closed the door. But the person stuck their foot inside, and I asked him what the hell he was doing. And in a very deep voice, he said, "It's just you and your wife, isn't it?" I yelled at him to get the hell out of here, now. My wife called, asking what was the matter. The guy looked up at the roof, as if seeing her, and then he looked at me. Slowly, he turned and walked away. When he was gone, I decided maybe there was enough trick-or-treating for the day, and I went to pick up my kids. And when I found the second, he was at the end of the road. He said a man with a white sheet had been following him, and that was the last time they'd ever been allowed to go trick-or-treating. The Leica. I've never enjoyed Halloween. Since I was a kid and straight through my college years, I never liked it, much rather preferring to be staying at home than going to Halloween parties. And so, working at retail, I am the guy who is usually given the shifts for Halloween because I don't complain too much, and this was one of those Halloween nights. I just finished my shift and I was driving home. The streets were mostly empty, as they usually are during the holidays, and I was driving there, and the street lights were to turn red, so I came to stop there, and that was when I saw something flicker at the side of my eye. From the bush, there was a man who had just jumped out. No, it was a number of men. They were dressed in Halloween masks and hockey uniforms, and in their hands they held guns and knives. They ran to my car so fast, I moved purely through muscle memory and slammed the accelerator. I was out of there before they could do anything too intense. By the time I'd gotten home, I remembered just how much I hated Halloween. The later. I stopped trick-or-treating at a later age than most, when I was around 15. To be honest, I had stopped sooner than that, but when I was 15, my friends and I weren't invited to our classmates' Halloween party, and so we decided to have our own party. I was dressed in the Red Ranger's clothes, while Jake wore a wolf suit and Adam wore a Superman costume, and then we were gone. We trick-or-treated at many houses, and it was so funny seeing the faces of the people. They kept asking us the same questions. Weren't we too old for that? And we said yes, and told them that we weren't invited to the party, so we decided to have our own. And so they would just shrug and give us the sweets. We didn't eat the sweets though, not all of them. We mostly gave them to the kids we walked past, and we were doing it mostly for the fun. And then we got to the last house. There were no kids coming to trick-or-treat in this house, even though it also had a pumpkin mask. We went and knocked on the door, and there was some shuffling from inside. The lights were turned off through the windows, but I could see a dark figure moving around. Finally, I heard the footsteps coming to the door, and it was swung open. There stood a fairly elderly man. He looked to be around his 50s, and the man smiled at me. I asked him, "Trick or treat?" And when he saw me, his smile faltered a bit. He smiled again though, and told me to step in while he went to get something. I stepped inside, and then the old man said, "Not you." He told my friends to stay out. I asked why, and he said they would get too much mud on the floor, though there was no mud, and this was starting to get uncomfortable. But I got in, and he closed the door behind me. Then he turned on the lights. I had to bite my tongue. The room was full of men. They were sitting on the couch and on the table and the extra chairs, and all of them were turning on the door, so they were staring at me. I felt like I was on stage. I had to wait there for a few minutes before finally the old man returned, and he had 3 candles. He asked me why am I trick-or-treating at such an age, and I told him. He wasn't amused though. He told me that I should go home, and I am taking all the candy from the children. And I stepped out of there. I told Adam and Jake suggested we stand there and make sure no other kids come trick-or-treating there. And that's what we spent most of that night doing. The Systema. I remember one time I went trick-or-treating. I must have been 7 at the time. I'd been waiting for the day for such a long time, and I was systematic about how I was going to get the candy from the people. I intended on following a specific route to make sure I get as many candy as possible in the limited time I had. And it started out well in the beginning. I got myself plastics full of candy by the end of the first street. But as I was going to the second street, I noticed that there was a man standing under the tree. The orange street light didn't make his face too defined for me, so I couldn't make out his face. But he was so scary that none of the kids were walking down the street. We all walked around him, but at the same time, I really wanted that candy from the street, and so after I was done with the house, I decided to try that street. I went there and trick-or-treated at the house. But then, as I was walking down the walkway, I heard a guy saying, "Hey." I looked up and I saw that it was that guy. I could only tell it was him from his brown leather jacket. I greeted him back. He said it looked like I got myself a lot of candy, and I said yes. He then told me that he could get me a lot more candy, but I remember I was just disquieted by the smell of the cigarettes off him, and also the look in his eye wasn't particularly charming. So I said no thanks and was about to move on, but he stopped me and asked if I knew where he could get any candy. And I thought it was strange that a man that old would want candy, so I stood there and I spoke with him. We spoke for a while, but then I noticed there were fewer and fewer people walking around. He had been stalling. He must have seen my eyes wandering around, because he asked me, "Do you have somewhere to be?" I said yes, I have to be home. But by then, I looked at his face, and I kid you not, the man looked like a shark with his grin. I told him goodbye and turned to walk away. He told me to wait and tried to hold me, but he just got one of my candy bags. I told him to leave me alone and that I had to get home, but he said no, so I left the bag and ran away from him. He asked me if I really wanted to leave my candy, and to be honest, I really didn't. He then said I should come with him, where he would take me to where there is more candy. But then he saw something behind me, and he turned and walked off slowly. It was one of the parents. They asked me if I was okay, and I said I was alright. And they took me back to my parents, telling me I should be careful who I talk to. The hangar. This didn't happen at Halloween, but it feels like it fits into the Halloween theme. So I was hanging out at our living room and watching a movie on the laptop. The TV was turned off, and our couch was right next to the window, and so I could see the rain falling gently from outside. And then When I turned to look at the rain, I found that there was a pumpkin head looking at me. I screamed and fell off the couch, and when I stood up, it wasn't there anymore. I couldn't understand if what I'd seen was real or not, but it was truly terrifying. Then I heard the door jittering, and I ran over to it and looked at the handle. There was definitely somebody trying to open the door, but I knew that they couldn't. But then it clicked. The door clicked, and afterwards, it slowly started to open, and I decided I had seen enough. So I kicked the door shut and locked it again, and then I waited. But the door didn't open again. Still though, I could never sleep again after that.